Hello, welcome back to Mason Sports Insider. I'm Tyler Byrum alongside Dan Ward. We had a very quiet day on the front, or a week, on the front of George Mason Athletics. Only a couple basketball games for us to cover.
Yep, the teams are still getting into the swing of things with the out-of-conference schedule, but they did have a couple games, so let's not waste any time. Let's get you caught up. We'll begin, as usual, with the men's basketball team, who had a couple of games this past week, the first being an away game against Towson University. The teams opened up the game trading baskets before a 15-2 run gave the Patriots a 17-8 lead about midway through the first half. Mason then struggled to hold on to the ball, and the Tigers capitalized on their mistakes, ending the half on a 17-7 run to take a 30-28 lead into halftime. Towson came out firing out of the break, going on a 10-0 run in just over 2 minutes. Mason trimmed the lead down to 5 with just under 12 minutes left in the game, but the offense struggled to find a rhythm, and the Tigers would run away with the game, winning 75-54. Marco Gugliani-Cheech and Otis Livingston II were the only players in double figures for Mason with 12 and 10 respectively, as the team shot only 33% from the field for the game. On the other side, Towson shot 59% in the second half while committing only 5 total turnovers. The team looked to regroup and refocus before a Saturday home game against the U-Penn Quakers.
Returning home at Eagle Bank Arena, where they held their previous opponents to only 39 points and 23% shooting. However, the Quakers from Penn were 4-3 on the year, a winning record against the Patriots. Marquise Moore would get the scoring started for Mason with a jumper, and then we go to Marco, then Greer, and then Otis, as Mason would go out to an 8-0 lead in the contest. Part of it held to the Green and Gold's defense holding UPenn's leading scorer Darian Nelson Henry at bay. Miss after miss after miss, holding Henry to only 1-7 shooting and 4 points in the first half. Later in the game, Jair Greer had himself a night with this three-pointer that would put Mason up 37-16. He would go on to have 20 in the game, shooting 8 of 13. But you also have to give credit to Mason's defense. 6 steals on the night, 3 each from Moore and Livingston. Here's Otis taking it away and goes full court, then gets fouled. Once again, Livingston reads the offense perfectly, and this time finishes at the rim. Once again, now we look at Moore, who picks Nelson Henry's pocket and goes up for a strong finish at the basket. Mason in the game would finish with 14 points off turnovers, with Mason holding them to 24% shooting defensively. The Patriots would get a 63-44 victory, their second home victory in a row, and now stand at 4-5 on the season. While Mason remains at the bottom of our giant killer Atlantic 10 standings, they are still within range of climbing back up. And you see George Washington and Dayton at the top, and those are going to be huge threats this year to really not only the Atlantic 10, but in the entire NCAA in general.
Without a doubt, George Washington and Dayton are definitely going to be teams that you want to look out for to make it into the NCAA tournament. They are always strong competitors in the A10, and this year especially, a lot of high expectations for George Washington. Wouldn't be surprised how far they go to continue their successful start to the season into the A10 play.
Yep, they got that big win against UVA earlier in the season. But moving back towards Mason, really tale of two teams, as you were telling me earlier on. I mean, if you look at the Towson game, you just like, oh, as old CAA rivals, as a game Mason should have won. A little bit embarrassing that it finished how it happened. But then we turn around and then on Saturday, you see all the results, all the good things that you want to see, all the problems that they fixed in the Penn game. And it was really interesting to see how the team can look so good on Saturday, but then on that away game against Towson, just kind of questioning why were they so bad at that point.
A lot of that comes with the new coaching and the new players. They're still building the chemistry, and that's kind of what happens when you're having 2 starting freshmen. You have to go through the growing pains. It's not only the freshmen that didn't have a great game in the Towson game, but when you have 6 freshmen on the team and when you're going along with a new coach still trying to learn system, you have to deal with those growing pains. You'll have games against Towson where you just can't score the basketball and Towson shoots the lights out. And then you have games against Penn where you shut down the guy who has been dominating for Penn all season and you look like a team that can't be beat. So we like the games, though, that they are the team that looks like they can't be beat against Penn. It shows a lot of promise for the future.
Yeah, it seems they've gotten a whole lot more momentum, a surge of momentum at home games. But you mentioned the team shutting down Darian Nelson Henry. I mean, it looked bad for Penn at points. I mean, Nelson Henry, first we saw Siobhan Thompson guard him early on, and Thompson, very good. He wouldn't go for many of the fakes, just held his ground and forced Henry to go around him, and Nelson Henry was very uncomfortable with that, as you saw numerous misses, as we mentioned earlier in the game. Then Marco, at times, he would come into the game, and he shut him down as well. And then even Danny Dixon, the freshman, he came in and he did pretty well. I mean, Henry, that was the time that Henry actually was able to score points, but Danny Dixon was actually forcing him into misses. So seeing that whole interior defense just being strong and not needing really help from the outside guys, because often when you see the outside guys come in to help, that it leads to that pop-out three, right, which has been killing us all season long. Trusting that interior defense has been huge, and it paid off in the Penn game because, believe it or not, UPenn is very similar to us. They have that big guy in the middle that likes to dominate, and then when it doesn't work for him, you just pop it out and hope the three goes in, and we were able to shut down Penn this time.
Yep, defense wins games. That'll be a key theme for the rest of the season. Yeah. Moving on now, we go to the women's basketball team. Coming off a road trip in which they played 5 games in 11 days, they returned to Eagle Bank Arena for their second home game of the season, taking on the Georgetown Hoyas. The first quarter was a battle back and forth, with the Patriots taking a 2-point lead into the second, 15-13. The second quarter was all Mason, with the defense stepping up to hold the Hoyas to only 8 points, and the Patriots took a 30-21 lead in halftime. Despite the momentum seemingly on Mason's side, the Hoyas were the ones to come out in the third ready to play. 12 points by the Hoyas, combined with a 6-minute scoring drought by Mason, locked the game at 35 all late in the second half. Mason had only a 2-point lead heading into the fourth, where Georgetown continued their dominance. Taylor Brown took it upon herself to keep the game close, with 6 of her 26 points coming late in the game, but it wasn't enough as the Patriots fell to the Hoyas 63-57. Freshman sensation Deanna White led the way for Georgetown with 22 points as she searches for her third straight Big East Rookie of the Week honors. Chrissy McCube was the only other Patriot in double figures with 13. The loss drops Mason's record to 3-6 on the season as the team remains 11th in our Giant Killer Atlantic 10 standings, while the top 8 teams sit with winning records. Mason returns home Monday for a game against Delaware. So I was actually at that Georgetown game, and it seemed very promising in the first half, but again, it was kind of like a tale of two teams, but instead it was in the same game, where first half they were scoring the ball, they were playing great defense, and then the second half, for whatever reason, they struggled to score.
Yeah, again, you kind of mentioned the newcomers coming in. There were a lot of players who transferred, as we mentioned earlier in the season, that are just getting their feet wet, if you will, with George Mason. They're getting their first couple reps, first couple games, but you're kind of hoping at this point in the season, I mean, this was their 9th game on the year, that a lot of these kinks would be worked out and you see more consistency from the team. But it's really hard to tell. And we've also talked about how Taylor Brown, she's actually struggled this season. This game, she had 26 points, one of her highest point totals of the year against her former team in Georgetown, which is a big storyline in itself. But the rest of the team, they couldn't get it going and struggled a lot, especially later in the game.
Yeah, Coach Millicent had mentioned that. She, after the game, had said, didn't expect the offense to be the reason why this team's not winning games. Their defense is much improved from last season. They allowed over 70 points a game last year, and holding Georgetown to only 63, that should be, it's close enough where you can win. But for whatever reason, when you have the weapons of Kara Wright and Taylor Brown, Chrissy McCube, that should be 3 double-digit scores night after night, and yet they're still not able to put the ball in the basket some nights. So again, a little bit of just inconsistency. The chemistry perhaps still needs to be built. That excuse doesn't really work as well for this women's team because they do have a coach that's been here now for a third year, and a lot of key players returning, Taylor Brown, Dodson, McCube, and others. So hopefully they'll be able to work out these kinks. They did have that long road trip, so it could have been a little bit of jet lag in there, or just coming back home after that long road trip could have had some effect. But now they've had a couple days off. They played Monday night, so we'll see how they did.
Yeah, we'll see how they do. And Georgetown's they're a very good team this year. I mean, last year they were kind of a team that was near the bottom of their conference, not really doing well. This year, though, they've kind of turned it around and really trying to become one of the top teams in the D.C. area. And they kind of showed that against Mason in a game that many people thought going in Mason should win. So now we'll take a look at the men's volleyball team, who in the offseason saw their long-time standing head coach Fred Chow resign from the program. Weeks after, the athletic department hired Jay Hosak, a 6-year assistant from Penn State, as the 5th head coach in program's history. With the changes in coaches, as often as you see, we've mentioned, to see a turnover of the team, with players transferring out of the program and a condensed roster for the next season. However, fortunately for the Patriots, There were a majority of the roster remains with the squad, especially the team's top stars in Paco Velez, Jack Wilson, Radoslav Popov, and Brian Negron. Joining the team in competition this year will include Langston Payne and Garrett Kohler, who were redshirted last season with Chow still at the helm. The incoming freshman class consists of 7 players, 5 of which are from the Virginia Beach area, with 4 of them playing on the same club team. The highest regarded out of the whole group would be Brad Creamer, one of the natives of Virginia Beach, and also received offers from 5 other schools, including national powerhouse UC Irvine and EIVA rival Penn State. Kramer is a middle blocker and will most likely replace Hunter Stevens' spot in the lineup, who graduated last season. He will fit in perfectly with the rotation of Velez, Wilson, Popov, Negron, and Christian Elias playing in the libero position. So, already looking towards the men's volleyball season is one of my favorite times of the year. Men's volleyball team is one of those hidden gems at George Mason. But exciting to see that even with the coaching change, that not much seems to be changing at all.
Yeah, you like that the team is sticking together, because we've mentioned with basketball teams and with other teams earlier in the semester that chemistry is important, and these players know how good they were last season as a unit, and you can see it when they're on the court and even off the court. I see them hanging out together all the time, walking around. They really build a strong unit, does that Mason men's volleyball team. So I like that the key players are sticking together, the Popovs, the Paco Velezes, and the fact that they are still together and bringing in this new talent and an experienced coach from Penn State. We saw Jackie Simpson coming from the Big Ten for the women's team. They had success. So bringing in another coach with Big Ten experience, or a Big Ten school, although it's different for men's volleyball, but coming from Penn State, always a great program. So he obviously has a lot of experience and a lot of key things that can come to Mason and really improve this program even more.
Yeah, one thing that's helped the men's volleyball program is that they always have their stars kind of staggered each year. When I was looking at the roster, each of the 4 guys that I mentioned are in different years of competition. I mean, Paco Velez is a senior, Jack Wilson is a junior, along with Radoslav Popov. Brian Negron's now a sophomore, and we have the incoming freshman class coming in. And it's great to see the balance like that. However, I feel like this may be probably the last season for a team of this talent. I mean, you only lost 1 senior in Hunter Stevens, which he was a huge threat. I mean, I don't want to downplay the play of Hunter Stevens because he was a great player for the team. But I mean, with the attackers that we have, the 3-headed monster, if you will, of Velez, Wilson, and Popov, they're just a huge threat against other teams. And Velez graduates this year. So you losing him, one of the leading attackers on the team, and the EIVA, is going to be huge. Hopefully, they're hoping to get past that hump and get past Penn State, which they haven't done in almost 2 decades.
Yeah, well, they'll have a good chance at doing so based on their out-of-conference schedule, because as many have said, it is a competitive but balanced schedule, and they will face some of the better teams, including the always nationally ranked UC Irvine twice in the offseason. So they'll be able to get a good chance to see where they stand nationally early in the offseason. That'll be even more important when they come into conference play.
Yeah, they kick off the season against UCLA, always a strong program. Then they go to the AVCA Showcase out in Utah, where they will play BYU and UC Irvine, as you mentioned. First of all, it's a huge honor to get invited to that showcase, because that's really kind of that preseason Barclays Center tournament that you would see in college basketball, where you just gather all the top teams from all the conferences and just kind of duke it out and see where they stand at this point. Then they face UC Irvine later at home. They also play Ohio State, IPFW, and Ball State, some of the notable teams out of conference schedule. And of course, they always play the Lees McRae's, the Pfeiffers, Lewis. We'll see them later on in the season. But one thing last season, they had a strong schedule, and they had great results early on against those top schools out west. But maybe we thought it kind of burned them out a little bit, because they had a huge West Coast road trip. They didn't get wins. They had quite a few losses before they returned home and were finally able to nab a win. But it kind of burned them out. They got encouraging results, maybe some 5-4 setters, was close in every single game, but it just kind of burned them out, and hopefully we don't see that this season. It looks more balanced. As I mentioned, they play UCLA right after New Year's. I believe it's January 5th. So, and it's big spread out over them. UCLA actually coming to George Mason, so they don't have to travel out west to start off. But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's always a worry, but hopefully playing the better competition will only help their chances. And we'd like to mention that the University of Charleston is now joining the EIVA this year, so there'll be another new conference rival for the George Mason Patriots.
University of Charleston, West Virginia, they started their men's volleyball program last season, and in the first year they didn't compete. They were one of those independents, D2, D3. I don't even want to try to explain the D1, D2, D3 situation in men's volleyball because it's very confusing. I could sit here for 30 minutes to talk about it. But they are joining the EIVA as a D2 school, so it will be interesting to see them going forward. A new in-conference competition, especially as Sacred Heart left the EIVA a couple years ago.
Well, that will wrap up this week's edition of Mason Sports Insider. Here's a look at this week's upcoming schedule.
Yep, once again, not a lot on the slate as we are getting closer to finals. A lot of teams are taking their regular breaks. As you mentioned, the women's basketball team will be taking on Delaware at home. By the time you see this, that game will probably have already occurred.
But then you will be able to check out the men's basketball team, who play both Tuesday home against Northern Iowa at 7 o'clock, and then they'll travel down to James Madison on Saturday at 4 o'clock, so a couple games for the basketball team.
Yep, and then the wrestling team, they return home as they face in kind of a weird tournament that doesn't have a name, where they place Clarion and Grand Canyon. Also, who will be showing up will be NC State. So if you're a wrestling fan, make sure you head out to the rack this weekend. They're going to have some action on Sunday. I'd like to apologize earlier on. I mentioned that Sacred Heart left the EIVA. It's actually Rutgers, New York, who left. They were a D3 school, and they got grandfathered into the system, into the EIVA, and then they decided to leave to go back down to D3 competitions. I would apologize to Rutgers, New York, and Sacred Heart. Sacred Heart is still in the EIVA. But that is all we got for you this week. Make sure you check out our graphic sponsor and media provider, Giant Killer, at their website, giantkiller.co. As always, here are our Twitter accounts, and you can tweet at us. Who knows? Maybe we might see your tweet on the show next time. You tweet something interesting at us. You never know what happens. If you also want to keep updated with Mason Athletics, we also try and give you the latest and greatest that we know. Until next time, I am Tyler Byrum, alongside Dan Ward, and we will see you guys next time. Hello, it is that time of the weekend for our Giant Killer Play of the Week. And the lone home match on the week, the George Mason men's basketball team took on the Quakers from UPenn. As you see, the leading scorer, Darian Nelson Henry, drive into the lane, gets stripped by Marquise Moore, who then takes it coast to coast, finishing at the rim for the George Mason Patriots. You see here, as he's going, it's 3-on-1, but no fear for Marquise Moore as he fakes left, goes right, puts it in for the Patriots as they would go on to win the game 63-44. Patriots now 4-5 on the year. I am Tyler Byrum for my co-host Dan Ward. We will see you guys next week.